Lecture 11, Contrastive Analysis. Before speaking about contrastive analysis, we have to speak a little bit about applied linguistics in general. In the period from the 40s to the 70s, the field of applied linguistics witnessed the appearance of some approaches, which are also called techniques. These techniques were used by applied linguists to enhance the understanding of the process of second language acquisition. They include firstly contrastive analysis, then error analysis, and finally performance analysis. All of them are related to the explanation of the process of second language acquisition. Research in second language acquisition has been much influenced by the approach known as contrastive analysis, or CA. In this perspective, that is, the one of contrastive analysis, a continuing major theme of second language acquisition research has been introduced. That was the influence of L1 on L2. How does a learner's first language influence the learning of the second language? The whole approach was about this theme. This type of research has influenced the way of teaching second or foreign languages. Contrastive analysis started with a linguistic focus. Then it was criticized, especially with the introduction of Chomskyan thinking in the late 50s. An internal focus in second language acquisition replaced this paradigm, the paradigm of contrastive analysis, giving way to the approach of error analysis. Here we can say in brief that the criticism of contrastive analysis led to the appearance of error analysis. So let's try to discover the first technique, contrastive analysis. Contrastive analysis is defined as a systematic comparison of specific linguistic characteristics of two or more languages. The goal of this comparison is to discover the structural differences and similarities that exist between languages. What do we mean by the structural differences and similarities? This refers simply to the features of each language at all the levels. The differences and similarities can be found at the level of phonology, at the sound level, or at word level, the level of morphology, or at sentence level, the level of syntax, or at the semantic level. Through this type of comparison, the contrastive analyst will arrive at the points where languages converge, where they are similar, and where they diverge, where they are different. Let's take the example of comparing the sound systems of two languages. The contrastive analyst may arrive at a result that two languages share many sounds, while they differ at the level of other sounds. Some sounds may not exist in the second language or in the first language. So this is a difference. If we compare the French language and the English language, for instance, we'll find that the sound re does not exist in English. We'll find also that the sound the does not exist in French. This result is important. At the same time, the contrastive analyst will find that these two languages share a lot of sounds like m, n, l, and so on. The same process can be undertaken at any level of language. This comparison provides insights into L2 learning. It is useful to show how L2 learning happens and where it may seem difficult or easy. Let's talk about the theoretical foundation of contrastive analysis. CA was greatly influenced by the theories which were prevailing in linguistics and psychology within the USA in the 40s to the 50s, the structuralism and behaviorism. When did contrastive analysis start exactly? The prompt to this type of activity was provided in 1957 exactly by the publication of Robert Ladou's pioneering work, his book Linguistics Across Cultures. In this book, Ladou shows how to do contrastive analysis in all the levels of language. The contrastive analysis approach has three main objectives. The first one is providing insights into similarities and differences between languages. This is the starting point to find the similarities and the differences between languages at all levels. The second objective is the explanation and the prediction of problems in second language learning. That is, how does second language learning occur and what areas exactly are problematic for learners. Thirdly, the objective of CA is to develop course materials for language teaching. Of course, the course materials are based on the comparison itself. The second objective of contrastive analysis, that is the explanation and prediction of problems in second language learning, is the core of what is known as the contrastive analysis hypothesis. The supporters of the contrastive analysis hypothesis believe that those elements that are similar to the learner's native language will be simple for him to learn, and those elements that are different will be difficult. Let's clarify more what is meant by the contrastive analysis hypothesis. Contrastive analysts believe that those elements that are similar to the learner's native language will be simple for him, and those elements that are different will be difficult. Whenever the structure of the second language differs from that of the mother tongue, we expect both difficulty in learning and error in performance. This means that if a contrastive analyst compares language 1 and language 2 as it is shown in the diagram, he will find the similarities and the differences. The similarities will be easy to learn, and the differences will be difficult to learn. The differences are the areas where errors occur. The errors in that case are caused by the first language of the learner alone, not because of another reason. In that case, we say that contrastive analysis has a predictive power of areas of difficulty. Contrastive analysis, through the comparison itself, predicts where errors will occur. How is all this related to focus in teaching? How does it influence the designing of teaching materials? We mean by teaching materials textbooks, of course. The contrastive analysts believe that teaching a second language will be directed, it will be focused on those points where there are differences between languages. Let's take an example. The example is about the comparison of the English and French languages at the level of the sound system. The result of the comparison will be giving insights on the sounds which are shared by these two languages and the sounds which are different. The comparison of French and English will tell us that French and English share sounds like m, n, l, and v. Now, for native speakers of English who are learning French, they will not have a problem pronouncing these particular sounds. But, for example, they will have a problem with the sound, the French sound r. When pronouncing r, they will resort to the rule of their native language. They may use r. Instead of saying ravi, they will have the tendency to say ravi. The same problem will happen to the native speakers of French. While native speakers of French, the learners, are able to pronounce the sounds m, n, l, and v very easily because they exist in their mother tongue, they will not be able to pronounce the sound the, for instance, this. In contrastive analysis, there is a close connection between discovering the similarities and differences between L1 and L2 and designing teaching materials. The similarities and differences between L1 and L2 will determine which areas will be focused on in teaching. We take an example here. Suppose that we have two classes where English is going to be taught as a second language. These two classes differ in the learner's mother tongue. The learners have different linguistic backgrounds. In the first class, the learners are native speakers of Arabic, and they are learning English as a second language. In the second class, the learners are native speakers of French, and they are also learning English as a second language. According to the contrastive analysts, and based on the contrastive analysis hypothesis, these two groups should not receive the same course in pronunciation. The course which is given to the native speakers of Arabic will focus on the sound differences between Arabic and English, whereas the course which is given to native speakers of French, the focus here will be on the sound differences between French and English. And this is what we mean by the fact that teaching will be directed at those points where there are structural differences between languages. This applies to the level of grammar or any other level of language as well. Now let's speak about the process of language transfer. The notion of transfer lies at the heart of the contrastive analysis hypothesis. The notion of transfer is originally derived from skill research in learning psychology, and it refers to the effects of prior learning on subsequent learning, previous learning on new learning. It is explained in psychology that when faced with a new learning task, an organism, a learner for example, will make use of what knowledge or skills it already possesses. In the case of language learning, here the learner possesses his native language to ease the process of acquisition, here the acquisition of a second language. In the context or in the case of second language learning, the individual already possesses knowledge of his mother tongue, his L1, and all its rules at all levels. And it is this which he tends to transfer when learning any other language. And therefore, we call it language transfer. Language transfer, or the use of previous knowledge when learning a new task, has several types. The types can be classified according to the direction of transfer or according to the effect of transfer. Let's take the direction of transfer. Here, from a previous skill to a new skill, or vice versa. Here, transfer can be either retroactive or proactive. Proactive transfer happens when there is an influence of existing skills on new skills. Retroactive transfer is the opposite. This shows how the new skill influences the previous skill. In the case of language, how the foreign language influences the native language in the case of retroactive transfer, but in the case of proactive transfer, how the native language influences the foreign or the second language. In both cases, proactive or retroactive, transfer can be positive or negative. Positive transfer, also called facilitation, occurs when the systems of the first language resemble, they are similar, and hence facilitate the learning of the second language. By contrast, negative transfer, which is also called interference from L1, takes place when the systems differ. In that case, the native language impedes. It is an obstacle in the learning of the second language, and it accounts for difficulty, and this is the reason of difficulty, and this is the source of all errors. Contrastive analysts focus on proactive interference, and they consider it the sole active force in second language learning. The criticism of contrastive analysis. Contrastivist ideas represented for many years the Bible of second and foreign language teaching. This technique became popular during the 40s and 50s, and at that time all foreign language and second language teaching was based on it. As a consequence, a number of contrastive analysis projects were launched in many parts of the world. These projects involved many languages of the world, the comparison of these languages. And this activity was inspired both by linguistic and by pedagogical motives. That is to say, some of the researchers were interested just in the comparison for the sake of comparing, but others were interested in this comparison for the sake of designing teaching materials. This continued till the 60s and the early 70s. At that time, there was a remarkable shift of emphasis away from the theory of language transfer and its implications. Here, contrastive analysis was criticized. The criticism of contrastive analysis involved two main points: the learner's exclusion and the faulty prediction. The first point of criticism is the learner's exclusion. As we have explained earlier in the contrastive analysis hypothesis, the most difficult areas in second language learning can be found or pinpointed through a systematic comparison of languages. This seems to be a theoretical matter, and the learner is not present. For instance, if a researcher compares the grammatical structures of the Arabic language and the English language and finds that some areas differ, for instance, tenses or the use of prepositions, he can simply say that such areas are problematic and they will automatically lead to the production of errors without consulting the learner himself or without seeing or verifying if really learners make errors in these areas. In other words, errors are not so much concerned with learning, but with specific structures of the second language, those which differ from the structures of the first language. Here, before teaching the learner and before testing his performance, errors are expected to occur. On this basis, it is said that contrastive analysis does not actually take the L2 learner into account. We should not forget that learning is a psycholinguistic process, but comparison is just a linguistic activity. The analysis of linguistic differences between languages is not helpful to understand learning. Learning is The second point of criticism is making faulty predictions. Prediction is related to the occurrence of errors. We have explained in the contrastive analysis hypothesis that contrastive analysis has a predictive power. It can tell in advance which areas are problematic and which areas are easy to learn. In other words, where the learner will exactly make errors. And if an error occurs, it is simply attributed to the influence of language transfer, interference from L1. The predictive power of contrastive analysis and the status of language transfer as the sole or a unique source of learners' errors were criticized. Contrastive analysis was shown to under-predict, firstly, and sometimes to over-predict, and sometimes to make indeterminate predictions. Let's take the case of under-prediction. In a number of studies where real errors were collected from learners, it was shown that some learners make some errors which were not predicted. That is to say, the errors produced were not related to the differences between the learner's first language and the second language. Even in the areas where there are similarities between the two languages, some learners often make errors. At this level, many other sources of errors have been recognized. In the case of over-prediction, some research findings asserted that CA over-predicts errors where they have not occurred. In some areas between L1, the learner's L1 and L2, which are different, sometimes the learner do not make errors at all. Here the contrastive analyst expects errors, but they do not occur. So this is a case of over-prediction. Of course, all this is based on evidence. These were empirical studies which were carried out with real learners. The problem of over-prediction is explained by the fact that difficulty is a psychological matter, and it differs from difference. Difference is purely a linguistic matter. In the case of under-prediction and over-prediction, James says that contrastive analysis makes false predictions. So these are two types of false predictions. The last problem with predictions is making indeterminate predictions. James, in his research about CA, argues that contrastive analysis provides indeterminate predictions. The predictions in this case are not exact. James explains this. Indeterminacy refers to the CA being unable to specify which of two or more structurally likely substitutions the learner will select. Contrastive analysis cannot tell you which structure the learner will select from his L1. On the whole, such a criticism reveals that contrastive analysis lacks empirical validations, empirical evidence. It has not always been supported by strong evidence. The strong and the weak claims of contrastive analysis. A claim means a version of a theory. In any discipline, theories are founded, and when they receive some criticism, their founders find it necessary to make some slight modifications to their original claims. Always, the original claim is the strongest form, while the modified claim or the modified theory represents the weak version. This applies to contrastive analysis. Contrastive analysis first appeared with a strong version and then was revised, producing what is called the weak version. In the literature on contrastive analysis, there are a number of variants to the contrastive analysis hypothesis along a weak-strong scale. The distinction drawn between the strong and the weak claims of the hypothesis paved the way for what came to be known as error analysis. Wardow was the first to distinguish between these two claims. The strong version of contrastive analysis is an a priori version. It is originally the one provided by Lado. It highlights, as it has been already explained, the prediction of second language learning problems on the basis of linguistic differences between the mother tongue and the second language. In this version, all errors can be predicted by comparing languages, and all difficulties are caused by L1 interference. The weak claim is an a posteriori version. We need to explain the difference between an a priori version and an a posteriori version. The first one treats errors before they occur, while the second one treats them after they occur. In the weak version of contrastive analysis, it is believed that comparison of languages could help to explain learner errors. CA can be referred to in order to explain some observed errors, not all of them. Wilkins supports this vision by asserting that prediction is an extraordinarily difficult thing. He attaches greater importance to the actual or the real performance of the learner by saying that contrastive analysis should be carried out to provide a linguistic explanation for known errors rather than a predictive procedure. We understand here that in the weak version of contrastive analysis, there must be some real performance on the part of the learner, and then when the errors are committed by the learner, we can attribute some of them, not all of them, to influence from the mother tongue by resorting to contrastive analysis or the comparison of languages. The second claim is generally considered to be more acceptable, though less interesting from a scientific angle. In conclusion, we can say that contrastive analysis has gained some popularity for some time, and it has influenced teaching foreign languages and second languages. For example, the audiolingual method is an outcome of this approach. Contrastive research projects in the late 60s took two broad directions. The first direction being linguistic and concerned with language typology, the classifications of languages, and the search for universals. This type of research is purely linguistic, and its outcome is types of languages. Many language families were established just on the basis of such comparisons. Of course, these classifications of languages are not genetic, but typological, based on their linguistic structures. The second type of research, which was conducted at that time, was purely psycholinguistic, more oriented towards discovering second language acquisition intricacies and complexities. Here, contrastive analysis became part of the wider undertaking of error analysis. It became part of error analysis, a new technique.